most of the women that came spent more money on their dress than they ever gave to the organization. I'm going to say something radical, which is not everybody should ask for a gift. There are a lot of steps to asking. So 20% of the people that stopped giving is because they weren't thanked appropriately.
Hello and welcome to my show. My name is Rashanka Jones, and today I have with me Valerie Jones. She is going to be talking to us about fundraising in general and how she helps nonprofits and for-profits raise money. Welcome, Valerie.
Thank you so much. So do you want to know a little bit about me before we jump in?
Of course. Can you tell the audience a little bit about, how you got into this?
So you might love me or hate me, but a year after you work with me, there's $1 million that wasn't there before. So I like quantifiable results. So I'm probably one of the few people that actually loves fundraising. I have been doing it for more than 25 years. I've worked for a lot of different kinds of nonprofits. And on the for-profit side, I've secured money for my husband's company, like investment money on Shark Tank and other things. So it's really
You're very
not
humble about that.
it's not that different, really. The process is often the same, and any good salesperson from a for-profit will tell you that first you have to identify your leads and figure out if it's a match or not, and that you want to engage the person to let them understand the product and you understand them better, and then hopefully you close the deal. But you don't just walk away and abandon your client after that, nor do you do that with your donor. It's an ongoing relationship.
You kind of summed up all my questions in the
Oh,
last 30
sorry.
seconds. But for someone who's just beginning to, whether it's a nonprofit or for profit, wants to start their fundraising journey, is feeling lost. The first step in my mind is, hey, let's set a fundraising goal. What are some key elements that that person should keep in mind when they are deciding on that number?
Okay. So if the individual is new, like I'm a new board member and I want to figure out how much I can raise, there are ways to set an institutional goal, which then you divvy up because it's a team sport. Nobody does the fundraising all by themselves. You're working together with the program person who's actually helping people and the executive director who's the administrator. So the first thing I look for is how much did you raise last year? Your best potential donors are the ones that are already supporting you. So if we look at that, and then how many new donors could we get or funders, and from where? Like if you just say, oh, it's going to increase 5% a year, my question is how? Who? Anytime I present fundraising goals, they're well researched. Like I expect an 85% renewal rate from our current donors. We have a new program to attract donors at $1,000 and up, or whatever. Of the 50 prospects we've identified there, because it's the first time, we expect we will secure gifts from like 10%, 10 of them. And that would be this. The average gift we expect to get is not always $1,000, but some $850. So we'll average that out. And I also go through the portfolio of resources. So like, this is what we think we can get from individuals. What have we gotten before from foundations? Are there prospective foundations? Do the research, do the projections? Are there corporations that could support us? So what I don't believe is fundraising goals based on hope. I mean, hope is important, but if you're making a budget for a nonprofit that is depending on every penny, it's incumbent upon you to make sure that your projections are realistic.
So, what I'm understanding is that, firstly, you're talking about it from the perspective of someone who's already raised some money
Yes,
in the
right.
previous year.
That's if it's a nonprofit that's already got a base of donors. Yes. So
Okay.
you're saying starting fresh as an
I
individual.
think we can talk about both categories. For the ones that have already raised, you're saying that be a little more analytical and kind of work with the numbers, right? And it should be like an institutional decision.
Right.
What about someone who's just set up the NGO? That I feel is the hardest part, right? You got to start small.
Absolutely agree. That's the hardest part of all. So, but there, fundraising is like from the top down and the center out. So some people think, oh, that rich celebrity over there, that's the best person to ask, even though they have no relationship and the person has never heard of them or their cause. But really, it's from the people that are closest to you because they're going to care the most and also that might be most interested. So again, like Rashanka, if you asked your aunts and uncles and cousins and siblings, like, would you give it $100 to support this cause that I care about? You're much more likely to get an ask than if you just send a bunch of letters to corporations, And by the way, unsolicited requests rarely get funded.
Yeah.
So how do you break through that first time? And so for that, I would say almost all the requests I've made in all my time are people that I have a connection with. So if you look somebody up on LinkedIn and it's like, oh, I see that they went to college with my brother. So let me talk to my brother and ask my brother if he can make an introduction. And if he says yes, then you're much more likely to get support from that person you'd like to reach through your brother than if you just sent them an email. So if you spend all your time asking friends and friends of friends, you won't have time to get along around to strangers. I think I've made maybe 10 cold calls in my life.
Wow.
So like, and also it's much more comfortable. Like then you have a reason. And also people can say, I'd rather not be introduced to her. Like
Yeah.
you don't want to talk to people that don't care about your cause. And they're probably great people. They're just interested in something else. Maybe they're supporting cancer and you want rights for women and girls or whatever, like God bless them. But starting from the top down and the center out, so is a great way to do it. And it's less scary.
I totally agree with you. We all underestimate the power of our personal network. We kind of go out looking for people, but actually, if we look inside, it's much better to just ask our friends and family. So that is such great advice. Um, so okay, so for someone who's just starting out, I think starting with friends, family, your extended network,
Mhm.
someone who's already been through the drill like a couple of times, you said use analytics. Before we get into reaching out to the donors, how do we start creating a good database of those donors? Like, how do we know that these are the people we should target?
First of all, that is probably the most important question you're going to ask me
Oh,
in this
wow.
interview because, like, how anybody works without a database is crazy because if you don't put them in there, it's easy to neglect them, and people are changing all the time. Friend we mentioned might go on to something else and he's not available anymore or whatever. So you can start with something as simple as an Excel, but honestly, and I can give you information you can put in the chat on free software for nonprofits that you can get for fundraising, tracking fundraising. And it's not just like, did they give, how much they give, what time, did we send them a receipt or a thank you note? But it's also, you want to build out that database, like, well, who knows them? So there, let's say there's 50 people you're starting with. Rashanka knows 10, Jeremy knows a different 10, Susanna knows another 10. So you want to know who knows who so that Susanna can continue to cultivate her people and she doesn't get an ask from somebody named Jeremy that she never heard of. So keeping track of that and deepening that. And also you want to track, like if you have any events, you want to have the same person invite them. So it's not just a generic invitation from the head of the nonprofit, but it's like Jeremy invites Jeremy's people. Rashanka invites Rashanka's people. So part of it is like building the database is important not only to track the financial information and email address and how people want to be referred to and stuff like that, but also to continue deepening the relationship. There's also something called moves management in fundraising, which is like there's a next move for everybody. Like if somebody dies, maybe the next move is to send something to the funeral and tell their family, how sorry you are or whatever. But there should always be a next step. It's not like they're in the database and then nothing happens. Does that answer your question?
It does, yes, it does. So you said that there are lots of free softwares online that can pull
Instead
out.
for low cost that I can send you, like that you could use for a starter, maybe, just starting a nonprofit and starting to build the database.
Okay, so does that kind of pull information of high net worth individuals in a certain area?
Fundraising software is like a lot of kind of software. It's basically a box with
Okay.
something, and you have to build out the information in there. So there are separate software. There's software services for everything. So you can buy research software that will help you identify top net worth individuals in Colorado who are interested in nature and the environment. And so you get a lot of background information on them. That doesn't mean that you know them. You
Mhm.
still need to find a way for a personal introduction, but it is, I think what you're pointing out is it's very important to prioritize. Because if you could ask the whole world, then who do you start with?
Yeah, and that is a good segue into my next question, strategic asking.
Mhm.
How do you not go out and ask everyone for everything? How do you strategize that first ask without making it seem like, hey, I'm asking you for money and making it a very uncomfortable conversation?
So, how to start your first communication should never be asking.
Hmm.
Never. Because how do you know if they even care? The people you find who really understand what you want and care about it and want to support it are stickier. So they'll stay with you year after year. Whereas if somebody just does it because like, oh, she's my neighbor and I'll ask her to make a gift to my thing, but they don't really care about the cause, they'll move on to other things. So the best ROI is from those that you've already sort of vetted and invited and engaged, cultivated. So like I almost never get a no, partly because I only ask people who are going to say yes.
Hmm.
So your first thing should be like, we're having a picnic next week. Love for you to come over. And then one of the things you could talk about at the picnic is your nonprofit. And if they go, oh, that's great, or my sister suffered from that disease, then you know you can continue the conversation. And if not, maybe you dig a little deeper.
But in this situation, so for example, you've created your database, a lot of them are unknowns, people you've never met or heard of before. In that situation, you can't reach out to them and say, I'm having a picnic, because they're not going to even firstly respond. And even if they do, they're not going to a random person's picnic.
Right. So just to be clear, I am not saying start your database with those wealthy people.
Okay.
I'm saying start the database with the people that are closest. As
Okay.
you build out back to the network, when you identify those wealthier people, then you have more people who might know them
Oh, okay.
that might have connection. Like you're broadening your network of people. And so if you're at the gala committee and there are 20 people, nobody knows this person, but maybe one of them knows someone who might know them. So that's sort of the art and science. But really, if you invite a room full of strangers to your party, you'll probably have no one at your party. Right?
I
But
agree.
if you invite people when you broaden the base of support, then there's a likelier chance that you will know somebody who knows them. Now, they might just have been at a big golf tournament with them
Mhm.
or
Mhm.
something. They may not be their closest friends, but that doesn't mean they can't at least make an introduction. And the introduction, again, is not the ask. It's like, I'm involved with this wonderful organization here. I'm not asking for money, but I wondered, is this something you're interested in? Would you like to learn more? Another way to start that relationship is if you research that person and you find out that wealthy person is giving to a lot of these other organizations, then you can research online, like what kind of gifts do they make? Like some people want to underwrite scholarships. So maybe there's an equivalent of a scholarship and that's something they like. So it's relationship building.
It's
It's
relationship.
not speed dating.
Yeah. I feel like it's very important to identify people who will fall off after the first year versus people who will continue. When you're having these conversations about, hey, I'm working on this cause and would you want to learn more or whatever, and someone objects or says no directly, I wouldn't say it's a hit on your ego, but it takes you a
Yeah.
minute to just digest the no. And how do you overcome that? And do you think one should continue convincing that person or should just back off and move on to the next?
So hopefully you've done enough engagement and, before you actually ask. So you've already researched, you've already cultivated them, they've expressed some interest. I don't want to ask somebody who's like, they haven't indicated
Mm.
any interest. I'm going to say something radical, which is not everybody should ask for a gift. There are a lot of steps to asking. The top reason why people stop giving when surveyed, so
Okay.
20% of the people that stop giving is because they weren't thanked appropriately. So back to like what's going to make you comfortable asking, everybody has a different asking personality.
Mhm.
Some people are better thinking. If that's all they do, they can help save that 20%. God bless them. Some of them are really good at engaging. They like parties and stuff, but they never want to do the ask. Like, have them do that. And if you're the person asking, then you want to be pretty clear upfront what they're interested in. And what I find is it's a conversation. It's not just one ask. So I would start with like, oh, thank you so much for making the time to meet with me. I really appreciate it. When I was driving over, I was thinking about fishing with my dad growing up in Maine. And you said you're so interested in nature. Tell me, like, what got you interested in nature? So they're sharing. So there's a question. And then I could say, I would love your advice. I'm working with this nonprofit. there are three main areas we're focusing on. We're trying to get more women's right in the workforce, but we also want to start with girls and then supporting single moms. Like from the work that you've done and what you've seen in your life, what do you think is the most important of those three places to focus? So and then they're telling you more about, well, when I was doing this is how I helped this organization. So like you're listening to this information all the time. And then the next question would be like, well, right now we're particularly involved in a girls program that I'm excited about. And Zach and I have already committed this amount of money. Is that something you could join us in helping? And either they can, first of all, you're demonstrating that you're leading by example, and then they can say, oh, I can't join you now. They might say no. So if you're nervous, it's easy to say, okay, well, thanks very much. Really appreciate the time, and run out the door. And that makes them feel that all you cared about was the transaction, not them as human beings. First of all, I keep my mouth shut because sometimes people will say, well, no, not now. But I might be taking my company public and maybe in 6 months it might be a better time. Could we talk again? Like people sometimes think through out loud. And if you're talking at them all the time, there's no room for them to think and to really consider your ask. So sometimes no is not now. Sometimes no is not this program. Sometimes no is not this amount. Like you're a curious person. If you're curious enough about them as a person, it's like I'm just starting out. It would really help me if you could explain, is there a particular reason that would be helpful? Like, is this a bad time? Or do you prefer to talk to your partners? Or have you already committed deeply to this? And it would be really helpful for me to know. And then rather than just taking that no, I always have something in my, like what I call the backup ask, which is, so we are doing this event and we're asking for contributions of safety helmets. Would you be willing to help as a volunteer? And if you can't, that's great. But if you can, I would love it. And they might say, well, I'm not sure. And you could say, let me send you the sign up sheet and a little information about it. And it's like, great. And then I always think for whatever, it's like, even if they decide not to support this at that time, you can say, I got to say again, how much I appreciate and admire the philanthropy you've already done. That's one reason why I was really excited to meet you. So thank you. And then send a follow-up note that says, it was so great to meet you. We talked about this, this, and this. And I really look forward to hearing if you might be able to volunteer. So again, it's a relationship. It's not just an ask. And it's easier on your ego.
Yeah. Wow.
I'm sorry, that was a long answer, but
No, but that was kind of a real world example of how
yes.
one should do it. And I'm so glad you walked me through that. You mentioned then thank them. What are some low cost ways organizations can thank their donors?
Right. So, especially if you're just starting out, you don't have to do a generic, everybody gets a tote bag or something. I'm not going to give $1,000 to get a tote bag. Anyway,
Yeah.
so I'm much more interested in thanking people with engagement that gets them more involved. So, thank you so much for supporting the theater. I'd love for you to get a behind the scene tour with the director of our next play and its opening and say, is this something you'd be interested in? It doesn't cost very much. You can get the director to walk around backstage. It doesn't cost you anything. And it's really special and personalized, right? So I'm bigger on experiences, or, we're going to be giving out seed packs for the botanical garden. And if you want to help assemble in advance, that would be great. If not, all the donors at this level get this. And but it's about the organization. It's not just a generic thank you. I mean, there's a lot of guilt gifts, which I hate, but they work statistically if you're working with hundreds of thousands of people. There are certain people, if you give them the cards, they'll make another gift. But I think you're talking about a much more personalized approach.
Is this applicable to board fundraising as well?
Absolutely. Actually, that's one of the best things that your board can do is to help just invite them. If it's an environmental cause, like, would you like to come for a dawn canoe on the water? And this board member has a beautiful place on the Chesapeake Bay and has invited our donors to come out for a private, kayaking or whatever. So board members can do that. And for some of them, it's much more comfortable than asking, but they can do a lot for engagement and often in unique and personalized ways. Also, don't forget, a board member is important. A board member is really the boss. So it's more prestigious to be invited by a board member for a kayaking thing than by a staff member where they're paid to do it. It's their job. Does
No,
that make
totally.
sense?
Oh, yes, totally. So, let's talk about diversifying fundraising. Right now, we've been talking about high net worth individuals who we're thinking of raising funds from. What about corporations and getting grants? Like, how does one win a grant application?
Okay. So institutional funding does vary a little bit from corporate to what we call a nonprofit foundation. So if they're a big foundation, there's a process and they're public about it. Like here's what we're looking for. They're very strategic. If you fit these categories, you can apply. Some of them will only fund organizations of a certain size or in a certain geographic area, but that they're pretty transparent about that. Sometimes they reserve the right to reach out to the nonprofits that they want to fund. It's not an open application, but that's the minority. And also there's some smaller foundations that really it's a way a family gives in a tax advantageous way. But it's really mom and dad and the adult children decide where they want to give. So that can be sort of more casual and it's more like the individual giving we're talking about. But like a lot of people think if you're a good grants writer, then you can get money. Well, you want to be a good grants writer and experience rather than a bad grants writer. But it's not that different. Like I have relationships with a number of foundation officers, and it's their job to give away money. It's not their money. And because we've built a relationship over time where you can just say, I need some guidance. I've never done this before. Can you give me a hand? And they'll say there's some things they can't tell you, some things they can tell you. But if you go through the same friend to the friend thing, then they can say, oh, Krishank, I'd love to support you. But that was last year's initiative. And now we have a new strategic plan and we're funding different kinds of things. However, I know this other foundation and they might be very interested because they're starting a new initiative. So so the grants writing is important. You have to follow the rules, make it clear, make it simple, bold bullets, all that stuff. Long rambling grant proposals get you nowhere. And really think about it. They're looking for ROI, just like we are if we're investing. So if you say, we help thousands of kids and it's great, but you don't say what happens to them afterwards. It's like 97% of our kids go on to high school compared to 67% in the public high schools in Philadelphia. This percentage go to college or whatever. They have goals, just like we
Mhm.
have goals. If they're one of their goals, for example, is decreasing high school dropout rate, increasing education in disadvantaged communities, then you need to show quantifiable results, which is harder when you're starting out, but you can still borrow. Like I borrow everything. So if you don't know who to ask on a foundation, look at the donor list of other nonprofits that have similar missions. Who's giving to them?
Okay.
If you don't know anybody, you can start by borrowing those that fund similar causes. That's a good way to get started. And if you don't have a track record because you just started this nonprofit, you can also borrow statistics. So you can say, you may not be able to show yet, but you can say, one of our initiatives is literacy for girls in the classroom because they tend to be neglected. Boys get more attention or whatever. Other girls' literacy programs elsewhere have demonstrated this, and this technique works, and we're using this technique. Therefore, we're going to be successful. So you're borrowing the data. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. Fundraising events. I see a lot of nonprofits have like annual fundraising events, and some of them become very focused on making a profit. I understand the intentions are right and everyone's doing it for the right reasons, but I've been to a few fundraising events and it gets very pushy to
Yeah.
someone who's a donor. How does one organize a fundraising event that is both profitable and memorable, that people actually have a good time?
There are a lot of different fundraising galas, as you suggested. Some organizations have done them for so long. Some nonprofits, their business model is they do one big fundraiser and that funds most of their stuff for the rest of the year. They're not so dependent on smaller individual donor gifts or grants or whatever. Like I did a study once because I was so sick of galas. Most of the women that came spent more money on their dress than they ever gave to the organization. Like the assumption was, oh, she'll come, she'll have a good time, and then she'll give afterwards. Not really happening. And the people who did give afterwards were the board members who went because they had to go because they were members of the board. So, I agree with you. I think there's a lot of waste. And also, if you just look at like, I could do a fundraising gala, a very efficient one, and spend 75 cents to raise $1. Or I could do the private kayaking experience or whatever that's really moving, and make 100 cents on the dollar. So it's kind of, you are totally spot on in terms of that. And if you decide you're going to do an event, it's really important to set the goals. As you said, is the goal just money? Or are you trying to introduce them? Are you trying to, like, I've been to some great fundraising events where the main focus is a killer video of the experience of the people that have benefited, and then having people come up and speak that are beneficiaries. Like, I was dealing with this and you helped me and it changed my life. And another way to make it much more real is if there are beneficiaries. That's much more profound to have somebody like that sitting at your table. Like, it's a table for 10. It's hard enough to fill it up anyway. Have one person who's part of the program, or one of the program officers who's like there on the front lines every day, serving the soup or whatever. Like, that's much more moving and impressive and mission centric than a bunch of auctions.
What about having an auctioneer at these events? Do you think that's cringe? Like one should not do that?
It really depends on the organization. Like, some places have a culture of those
Mhm.
kind of auctions, and they have the same person who does it every year, and they're really professional and great and entertaining and whatever. So it could be playful. It doesn't have to be really pushy. But again, what is the goal? Like, did you set a strategy that the goal is the auction? And if I was going to do that, whether it's a professional auctioneer or not, I would be interested in auction items that are mission centric, and even maybe they go to somebody else. Like, I'm going to auction 3 really cool bicycle helmets for girls. Who's going to pay this? And then they can have them for themselves, or they have the option of giving it to the girls' safety program. There are plenty of really good professional fundraisers who do this, and it's really a business. And I'm professional, but I'm more mission centric. And so maybe some of those people that you'll never see again won't really care. You haven't lost anything. But if you deepen the relationships with some of the people who come, who either didn't really know that much in the beginning, but then they're impressed, or that find themselves caught up in the desire to, like, well, shit, I can buy helmets for my kids. So, you know what I mean? Like, you're losing some of the people that might not matter long term anyway, and you're deepening relationships with people either that didn't know you before but might be called, make a connection with, or you're deepening relationships with the donors and supporters you already have. So I don't know if that makes sense.
No, that makes total sense. Should a nonprofit work with a consultant in doing this? I personally feel they should. What is your say in this? Like, do fundraising consultants create like a yearly plan for them? Like this is what we'll
Exactly.
do.
Yeah. Are you investing in the work of
Yes.
fundraising
Yes.
as opposed to just everybody being volunteers? I would say absolutely. And the most successful kinds of nonprofits like Sierra Club or Harvard, they spend 20, 25 cents on the dollar for their professional development staff and their database. So this is not like a new thing or a bad thing. Like, if you can get somebody on the board to pay for that for a year, then it's a really good investment, because in that person, if you want to, you can bring in consultants. I rarely work with organizations with operating budgets under $1 million, or who don't have a professional fundraiser on staff, at least part-time, because otherwise it's like, I'm a cannon and all you can handle is a buckshot. There's nobody to work with me on the other side. So then, are you going to pay $150 an hour or $250 an hour for me to do meetings or data entry that you should be paying somebody $50 an hour for? That doesn't make sense.
Totally makes sense. To end things, I want to focus a little bit on the long term sustainability of retaining your donors
Mhm.
and also donor fatigue. After 2, 3 years, donors kind of get bored with the same story. They want to look at new initiatives, new programs. How do you keep your donors excited about the cause?
Well, first of all, there's some people for whom, because of the time of their life or whatever, they're going to move on. They're not your donors. You don't own them. They are people that are generous people. They're interested in a lot of things. So, for example, for the daycare center that I was on the board of when my kids were little, it's like, there's no way they're going to keep giving, when they're paying for middle school, or they're, involved, their kids get older. The grandparents are sometimes stickier and really fun to work with, because they still adore their little grandchildren. So you're going to lose a certain number of people, and that's just natural, which is why you have to always be cultivating new donors
Right.
as well. In terms of keeping things exciting, I think it's more exciting when you have a voice at the table, or at least some engagement. So I'm going to be less bored if I do kayaking this year, but then I get a chance to go on a wetlands exploration walk with somebody the next year. So the more engaged I am, the less likely I am to be bored. But if it's thank, ask, thank, ask, thank, ask, it's like that gets old fast. And there's so many other places that are pitching every donor. So there's no perfect way to do it. And we all acknowledge that people's lives change and they move on. But I think to keep the donors that you have the most, engage them more. And some people go from donor to volunteer to board member, and then they really own the organization. And so the other thing I wanted to say is besides just the yearly money, there's a long-term benefit. Like the largest gift anyone will ever give in their life is after they die. It's their planned gift, it's their estate. So I got a call when I was working at the Philadelphia Zoo from an attorney, and he said, there's somebody who wants to give you $85,000. He said, well, she was a single woman. She came to me to do her will. I said, well, what do you care about? And she said, well, I like animals. So he said, how about the zoo? And she said, okay. But if you think about what we have found is that steady long-term donors, like even people who give $25 or $50 a year, often are the best prospects for a planned gift. So keeping even lower level donors, and there's lots of ways you can do that, engaged, especially as they get older, engaging them in a planned giving program like special benefits and stuff like that. That is the biggest gift you'll probably ever get from a donor, but it depends on that consistency. So you're right to focus on it.
Okay. To end things, what is one piece of advice you would give to a nonprofit that is trying to build a donor base and doesn't know where to begin?
I would go back to top down and center out. It's really a heart-based business, and finding the people that are going to connect with the heart. Each of you involved, the handful of people that's creating this nonprofit and this cause, is going to have different skills. If you have somebody who's a professional corporate, like law librarian, they can find out all kinds of stuff for you for free about how much money somebody has, all that sort of thing. So maybe they're your research group. And somebody else who's a caterer, maybe he's like, I know everybody is hosting every dinner and it costs a lot of money. And they're my clients. So let me introduce you to some of these people. Maybe they want to help with the party. So my answer is tailor it to each person's strengths. Don't try to force them to do things that they're afraid of or they're going to do badly.
Okay.
Does that help?
Yes, no, thank you so much, Valerie. This has been such an insightful conversation and something I've always been very curious about. So thank you for your time, and I've thoroughly enjoyed myself today.
You're welcome. And I think you're going to put some information about my book at the
Yeah.
end. Nonprofit Hero, 5 Easy Steps to Successful Board Fundraising. And there's samples, just so you know, and you don't even have to buy it. Anybody watching this, like, get your local library to take it. Then all the other nonprofits in the area can benefit. But I have sample conversations, sample thank you notes, sample prospect research. There's a lot of samples there, so you don't have to figure it out yourself. I figured it out for you.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please like, subscribe, and share. I'll be putting Valerie's information and information about her book, Nonprofit Hero, in the description section below, so you can get it on Amazon, Kindle, or also at your library. Until then, this is Rishanka Jones signing off.